Ayatollah Khomeini, the man who changed Iran forever. likely believed the threat had been contained. A troublesome cleric had been removed from the center of power, far from the crowds of Qom, far from students and religious institutions. Khomeini seemed politically stranded. The monarchy's close ties with Western governments, especially the United States, deepened his criticism. But Khomeini was not alone in his frustrations. Across Iran, dissatisfaction was slow enough for many frustrations to gather around. Then came the cassette tapes. Simple, portable, easy to hide. Khomeini's speeches, recorded in Iraq, began traveling secretly into Iran through underground networks. Sermons passed quietly from hand to hand, mosque to mosque, market to market. Families listened in private, students copied recordings, clerics repeated his messages during gatherings, the government could censor newspapers, monitor television, control public demonstrations. But stopping whispers was harder, and stopping cassette tapes proved nearly impossible. For many supporters, hearing Khomeini's voice carried emotional force. Even from exile, he sounded confident, certain, defiant. He criticized corruption, inequality, foreign influence, and what he described as moral decline. He framed resistance not only as political, but spiritual. To supporters, he sounded fearless. To critics, increasingly dangerous. Not everyone supported him. Some secular activists distrusted religious leadership. Some liberals feared clerical power. Even within religious circles, disagreements existed about how deeply clerics should enter politics. But as dissatisfaction with the monarchy grew, many different factions found themselves united by one shared reality: opposition to the Shah. Then, suddenly, the pressure intensified. In 1977 and 1978, unrest accelerated. Economic difficulties increased public frustration. Demonstrations expanded. Intellectuals demanded reform. Religious protests grew larger. Political criticism, once whispered, became harder to suppress. And every government response seemed to deepen tensions. Then came a moment that changed everything. In January 1978, an article published in a government-affiliated newspaper attacked Khomeini personally, questioning his credibility and insulting his reputation. The backlash was immediate. Religious students protested. Demonstrations spread. Security forces intervened. People died. And in Shia tradition, mourning ceremonies held 40 days after deaths carried enormous emotional significance. Each memorial gathering created new protests. Those protests created more violence, more funerals, more mourning. A cycle had begun, and it kept growing, city after city, month after month. Crowds became larger, anger deepened. The Shah, once seemingly untouchable, suddenly looked uncertain. By now, Khomeini had become more than a dissident cleric. He had become the face of resistance. Yet even exile itself was changing. Under pressure from Iran, Iraq eventually restricted Khomeini's activities. In 1978, he left Najaf. Many expected his influence to weaken. Instead, something extraordinary happened. He moved to France, to a quiet suburb outside Paris called Neauphle-le-Château. And suddenly, the man once isolated in exile gained something he had never possessed before: global visibility. Journalists arrived from around the world. Television cameras followed him. International media amplified his words. From a modest home outside Paris, Khomeini gave interviews, issued statements, and continued communicating with supporters inside Iran. Ironically, exile had made him easier to hear. And back in Iran, the monarchy continued to unravel. Mass protests filled the streets. Strikes disrupted the economy. Oil workers joined resistance efforts. Universities erupted. Even parts of the political establishment began losing confidence. The Shah attempted reforms, promised change, replaced officials, spoke of compromise. But many believed trust had already collapsed. And above it all hovered one haunting question: could the monarchy survive? By late 1978, millions of Iranians were marching through cities in scenes almost unimaginable just months earlier. Protesters came from different political backgrounds, different social classes, different visions for Iran's future. Yet one image increasingly stood above them all: the face of Ayatollah Khomeini, still in exile, still outside Iran, yet somehow closer to power than ever before. The Shah still sat on the throne. The military remained intact, but something irreversible had begun. The foundation beneath the monarchy was cracking, and as winter approached, the impossible no longer seemed impossible. It seemed near, very near, because soon, after decades of rule, one of the Middle East's most powerful monarchs would face a decision he never imagined. Beyond his control. Then, on January 16th, 1979, the moment arrived. The Shah left Iran. Officially, it was described as a temporary departure. He said he needed rest. Some believed he might eventually return. Others already sensed the monarchy's long reign was ending. Television cameras captured the departure. Religious conservatives, secular liberals, leftist groups, students, nationalists, intellectuals, workers, and merchants had all opposed the Shah, but often for very different reasons. Many imagined different futures for Iran. Some hoped for democracy, others wanted constitutional reform, some imagined an Islamic political order, others feared exactly that. For the moment, however, they shared a common victory. The Shah was gone. But revolutions rarely pause. Only days after returning, Khomeini openly challenged the existing government. He rejected the authority of the Shah-appointed leadership and supported the creation of a new revolutionary administration. The political atmosphere turned volatile. Then came the decisive moment. On February 11th, 1979, after growing unrest and military neutrality declarations, the monarchy effectively collapsed. The Iranian Revolution had succeeded. A political system that had ruled for generations, gone. The speed shocked the world. Governments everywhere scrambled to understand the implications. One of America's closest allies in the Middle East had fallen. Regional politics suddenly shifted overnight. Inside Iran, celebration mixed with uncertainty. There was joy, but also confusion. What happened now? Who would rule? What shape would this revolution take? And increasingly the answer pointed toward one man, Khomeini. Though he held no traditional political office at first, his influence towered above nearly everyone else. Millions trusted him. Religious supporters viewed him as a moral guide. Revolutionary groups sought legitimacy through association with him. Slowly, the foundations of a new political order began taking shape. And at the center stood a controversial idea Khomeini had developed years earlier in exile: that Islamic jurists should help guide governance. For supporters, this represented protection against corruption and dictatorship. After decades of monarchy, they believed moral leadership rooted in religion could create justice and independence. But critics worried. Would religious authority leave room for political disagreement? What would happen to secular voices? Could a revolution built by many perspectives become controlled by only one? Those questions grew louder as Iran prepared for dramatic change. In April 1979, a national referendum asked Iranians to vote on the country's future political system. The result was overwhelming support for creating an Islamic Republic. To supporters, it marked the birth of a new Iran, free from monarchy and foreign domination. To critics, concerns lingered about how power would be distributed and whose voices might eventually be marginalized. And still, uncertainty remained. Because revolutions are often easier to win than to govern. The euphoria of victory slowly gave way to difficult realities. Political rivalries intensified. Competing factions struggled for influence. Old institutions weakened while new ones emerged. Revolutionary courts appeared. Debates over freedom, religion, identity, and power intensified. Iran had changed forever, but in which direction? Nobody fully knew. Even Khomeini, now elevated to immense influence, stood before challenges unlike anything he had faced before. Speaking against power was one thing. Holding power was something else entirely. The cheering crowds had spoken. The Shah was gone. The revolution had succeeded. But history's hardest chapter was only beginning. Because soon Iran would face internal divisions, international confrontation, and a devastating war that would test both the revolution and the man who stood at its center. And as hope collided with fear, one question lingered over the new Islamic Republic. Had Iran found salvation, or simply entered a new kind of struggle? Winning a revolution is one thing. Ruling a country after one is something entirely different. By 1979, leader, a role carrying enormous influence over the country's direction. His political theory, once discussed in seminaries during exile, had now become reality. Supporters believed this system could protect society from corruption, foreign interference, and dictatorship. After years of monarchy, they argued Iran finally had leadership grounded in moral and religious values. Critics, however, raised difficult questions. Would political opposition remain protected? Could religion and state coexist without concentrating too much power? These debates would define much of Iran's future. At the same time, revolutionary energy transformed everyday life. New laws reflected Islamic principles more closely. Cultural expectations shifted. Education, media, and public behavior increasingly aligned with the ideals of the Islamic Republic. For some, these changes restored cultural identity and spiritual values. For others, especially secular groups and certain activists, restrictions felt increasingly limiting. Political divisions also intensified. The coalition that helped remove the Shah had never been fully united. Religious conservatives, liberals, nationalists, and leftist factions had all fought against monarchy, but not necessarily for the same future. As power consolidated, rival political groups found themselves increasingly sidelined. Some faced pressure, arrests, or political exclusion. To supporters of the new government, these measures protected the revolution from instability and foreign-backed threats. Critics argued dissent itself was shrinking. Then came an international crisis that would change Iran's relationship with the world. In November 1979, revolutionary students stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran, taking dozens of American diplomats hostage. The crisis shocked the international community and dominated headlines worldwide. The students claimed they feared another foreign-backed intervention similar to the 1953 coup that had helped restore monarchical power after political upheaval. Deep mistrust toward the United States already existed among many revolutionaries who viewed Washington as too closely tied would last nearly 8 years and become one of the deadliest wars of the late 20th century. Entire cities suffered destruction. Young soldiers marched to the front. Families endured unimaginable loss. Missiles struck urban centers. Chemical weapons were used during parts of the conflict, adding new horrors to an already devastating war. Khomeini framed resistance as both national defense and moral duty. Supporters rallied around the government, believing Iran fought not merely for territory, but survival and independence. The war strengthened revolutionary identity and deepened loyalty among many supporters, but the cost was enormous. Hundreds of thousands were killed or wounded across both sides. Economic strain intensified. Entire generations carried scars of loss and trauma. Critics later questioned whether opportunities for peace came too late. Supporters argued Iran had little choice but to resist aggression. Even today, perspectives differ sharply on how the war was managed and remembered. Throughout the 1980s, Khomeini an era came to an end. For nearly a decade, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini had stood at the center of Iran's political and religious life. But long before becoming supreme leader, he had already altered the course of history. First as a religious scholar, then as a fierce critic of monarchy, and ultimately as the revolutionary figure who helped overthrow one of the Middle East's most powerful regimes. Now, after years of political upheaval, war, controversy, and immense responsibility, the man who had shaped modern Iran was nearing the end of his life. On June 3rd, this felt like the loss of a father figure who had guided the nation through chaos. For others, even those who had criticized aspects of his leadership, the moment still carried undeniable historical weight. A chapter of modern Iran had ended. Then came the funeral. What followed became one of the largest funeral gatherings in modern history. Millions traveled to Tehran to say goodbye. The crowds stretched across roads, fields, and rooftops. Some wept openly, others carried portraits or religious symbols. Families arrived together, hoping to witness history firsthand. The emotional intensity became so overwhelming that authorities struggled to control the enormous crowds. At moments, funeral arrangements were temporarily disrupted as mourners surged forward, desperate for one final connection to the man they believed had changed their country forever. To supporters, the massive turnout reflected genuine devotion and respect. To critics, it demonstrated the extraordinary political and religious influence Khomeini had built during his years in power. But regardless of political perspective, few could deny the scale of the moment. The images captured a country mourning someone whose influence had reached nearly every corner of Iranian life. Yet even before mourning had ended, a difficult question began to emerge. What happens after Khomeini? The Islamic Republic had institutions. It had laws. It had political systems designed to continue beyond any individual leader. But Khomeini's authority had often felt larger than politics alone. He carried religious legitimacy, revolutionary symbolism, and immense public influence. Replacing him would never be simple. Leadership eventually transitioned, and Iran's government moved quickly to maintain stability. The political system survived. The Islamic Republic endured. But outside official institutions, another debate quietly expanded. A debate that continues to this day. How should history remember Ayatollah Khomeini? Because few historical figures inspire agreement. To supporters, Khomeini remains the man who restored dignity to Iran after years of monarchy and foreign influence. They argue he resisted outside pressure, defended national sovereignty, and rebuilt Iranian identity around religion and independence. For many loyal supporters of the Islamic Republic, he is remembered as a revolutionary leader who stood against corruption and helped protect Iran from external domination. They point to one undeniable reality. He achieved what many once thought impossible. He overthrew a monarchy that appeared deeply entrenched, survived exile, and reshaped the political structure of an entire nation. His revolution permanently altered Iran's relationship with the world and inspired political movements far beyond its borders. But critics tell a different story. Some argue the revolution ultimately concentrated too much authority within religious institutions and narrowed political freedoms. Others point transformation, and symbols rarely belong to only one interpretation. What remains impossible to deny is the scale of his impact. Before Khomeini, Iran was a monarchy closely aligned with Western powers. After Khomeini, Iran became an Islamic Republic built around a political system unlike almost any other in the modern world. His ideas reshaped domestic politics, influenced regional movements, and changed international diplomacy in ways still felt today. Even decades after his death, his influence remains visible. His image still appears across Iran. His speeches continue to be studied. His political philosophy still shapes institutions and public life. Perhaps this is the strange truth about history. Its most influential figures never truly disappear. They remain present in institutions, in arguments, in memory, and in unfinished questions that generations continue trying to answer. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini changed Iran forever. That much is beyond dispute. But whether history ultimately remembers him as a liberator, revolutionary, visionary, controversial ruler, or something far more complicated may depend entirely on perspective. Perhaps the truth lives somewhere in between admiration and criticism, between hope and consequence, between revolution and reality. Because history rarely belongs entirely to heroes or villains. More often, it belongs to human beings whose decisions shape millions of lives in ways no one can fully predict. And in the case of Ayatollah Khomeini, the consequences of those choices still echo across Iran and far beyond it. Iran continues to change. Its people continue to debate. Its future continues to unfold. But one question still lingers in the shadow of history. Can one person truly change the destiny of a nation, or does history simply wait for someone willing enough to reshape it, for better or worse? That answer may still be unfolding.